I call the House to order.
Good evening, everyone, and I call the meeting to order. To start off today's proceedings, I ask everyone to stand for the national anthem.
Sri Lanka, Namo
And I will ask Sri Lanka to sign the Rotary pledge.
Service through business. As a Rotarian, it is my purpose to regard my business or profession as my opportunity to express myself in service to society, as well as a means to material gains, to maintain the dignity and worthiness of my calling by the acceptance and promotion of high standards and the elimination of questionable practice, to value success in my vocation as a worthy ambition when achieved as a result of service to society, but to accept no profit nor distinction which arises from unfair advantage, abuse of privilege, or betrayal of trust. To recognize that any sound transaction must be governed by practices which bring satisfaction to all parties concerned, and to esteem it a privilege in my profession or business to serve beyond the strict measures of duty or obligation, service above self.
Thank you. Please take a seat. Once again, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to be with you, especially 8 Rotary clubs coming together for this wonderful occasion. So, on behalf of the Rotary clubs of Port City, which is my club, Midtown, St. Gardens, Central, Colombo, Infinity, PanColombo, and Reconnections. Once again, warm welcome to all of you to JP 7 for a very interesting evening. And can I kindly invite our main speaker for the day, Mr. Jafferjee, to join us at the table. I think in the next 2 weeks, the country will see a lot of changes. Whether those changes are going to be positive or negative, it remains to be seen. The main candidates' manifestos are out, and predictions have been made. I think Mr. Jafferjee will enlighten us more on the way forward, or the different paths ahead, or the trajectories, as we call it. So we look forward to that, sir. But before we get to the main agenda today, formality is that the President's here will give out some brief announcements from each club, and then we will move on to the main agenda of the day. Right, so let me start from Colombo, Port City. A brief announcement on a project that we have been working on called Healing Minds Matter, which is a program focused on mental health and suicide prevention. It's a joint project with Colombo Victor, with President Russell here on my left. So the main program has 2 aspects. One is on touching 10,000 lives, so our focus is training 10,000 people and creating awareness all around Sri Lanka on mental wellness and suicide prevention. We started this a few weeks ago and touched 1,500 people in 10 God. And then the other part of the project is rehabilitating a 10,000 square foot area in the Colombo University Medical Faculty Department of Psychiatry. The project will cost about 150 million rupees. It's going to be a crowdfunding project, so we're working on that. So we call it the 10,000 lives and the 10,000 square feet, 2 different sort of numbers in a sense to focus on mental wellness. And this will also give rise to the first ever Rotary Mental Wellness Center, 1,000 square foot area given by the medical faculty, especially for Rotary, which will be run by Port City and Midtown, hopefully for next year. So that's it from me, President Rasini.
Thank you, Mr. Michael. Well, I'll also give a small brief and not to talk too much about it. The reason behind this initiative is actually because last year we lost 3,500 lives to suicide, and these are only the reported numbers, and we need to add a lot more to it. And the youngest age of someone dying from suicide in Sri Lanka now is age 8. So that's the reason we have taken this project with a lot of seriousness. We invest a lot of heart and our soul to it. And also inviting everyone over here to give us that support in whatever way you can to actually take this initiative forward. With that, there's also a Clean SM project, Rotary for Environment, that we are doing again with with Colombo Reconnections and Cinnamon Gardens together, we'll be cleaning the Hill Beach, and that with a lot of road tractors and e-tractors involved. Plus, another thing which is very connected with the Healing Minds Matter initiative is that we have joined hands with Lanka Lifeline 1375 line. And that is where we are going to launch a massive poster sticker campaign that will reach to all police stations, Ram Military Office premises, schools, universities and hospitals. And so that's another thing which is actually Lanka Lifeline is a mental health and a suicide prevention helpline. Plus, very happy to announce that one of the signature in-town family projects, Blind Walk, will happen on the 20th of October 2024. So more news to come, and we want to invite all of you to be a part of it. Thank you so much. That's it from my end.
Thank you, President.
Good evening, everyone. Quick update from Cinnamon Gardens. So I think this month we are having 3 projects lined up. The first project, which is happening this weekend on the 14th, is at MOH Egaduyana. We are actually trying to work on the well-being of pregnant mothers throughout their 10 months. To help them and their families. There are mothers who actually their BMI, everything is affected because they are not economically sound for them to have a healthy diet and all of that. So we are trying to support them throughout the 10 months, handhold them. That's happening on the 14th. And on the 28th, I will not talk much. I think Rasini briefed about the Clean Up Sri Lanka project. So we are tying up with, we are in that project together. And on the 29th, we also have been working with the Nayakakanda Safe House for the last 4 years. There are about 50 young girls below 20, from 12 to 20 years of age, who are actually serving their probation. They have been directed from courts to the Nayakakanda Safe House, and they're not supposed to go out. They're supposed to completely be within the premises. So the schooling, everything happens within. And we have been doing multiple projects at that place. And this particular initiative is actually for them to get engaged with the environment. We did a similar project last year as well on the vegetable gardening. So we have tied up with the agricultural officer at that in that area, and then trying to help them out through this endeavor. So this is some exciting news for the entire district, which will be happening on the 1st of December. We are trying to give you all a unique experience. Through it's a movie theater that we are actually trying to have. The theme is Under the Stars. So there'll be movie, carnival, music, all of that happening on the 1st of December. The whole idea is to actually generate funds for the Rotary for Little Hearts project. So this is an announcement for you all to keep your dates free. Please diarize your calendars and block the dates. We would love to see all of you joining with us because it's actually for a very worthy cause. So that's it from Cinnamon Gardens. Thank you.
We've got just a few announcements from our fort. So next week we've got a joint meeting with His Excellency Advocata Institute of Sri Lanka. And on 28th September, it's a Clean Up Sri Lanka project where literally all the local clubs in Sri Lanka are joining hands and doing this mission up to the same day to bring major awareness. That's our main plan.
Yeah, in the interest of time and for the sake of brevity, there won't be an announcement to be made. However, if you need about the projects that we have already done and about the ongoing projects, you can follow and subscribe our Instagram page, Rotary Club of Colombo Reconnections.
Right, thank you very much, dear visitors. So now it's time for the main point today. So Mr. Jafferjee has kindly asked us not to read out the very long introduction we had for him. Simply, he said, in one line, as the chairman of the Advocata Institute, I think everyone knows Mr. Jafferjee and the contribution he has made to the country over the past few years, past many years, and also about the warning signals he gave before the crisis, and then about how he helped us and created great awareness over the years. So we'd like to hear from you, sir, on the way forward and what's in store for Sri Lanka. Over to you, Mr. Jafferjee.
Whilst they are getting their chairs ready, good evening. Thank you very much for inviting me today to address you. I am the chairman of a think tank called the Advocata Institute, which was set up a little bit over 8 years ago. And the reason we set this think tank up was to put across alternate economic ideas. We felt that the left was very well informed and very well organized in Sri Lanka, but there are no other counter arguments about libertarian values, about free market system, about market economics, and that's what was the primary reason why Advocata was set about. So we are not only an advocacy organization, but we also do a lot of research. And for our luck, the mother of all crises came along. So that gave us a lot of airtime because we were warning that what Sri Lanka was going to face was a solvency crisis, while the policymakers were focusing on a liquidity crisis. This crisis was many, many years in the making, but obviously it got catalyzed by some very bad decisions. Now we had a mother of all crashes in 2022, and now we are in September 2024. There has been a significant amount of improvement. So what I would like to do today is that to give you a way of thinking, right? I'm going to touch on a few issues. I'm going to preempt the most important question that many of you may have is who's going to win the election. You, like me, have no idea. But what I did do is I did ask a particular person who does polling, right? What this person told me just before the call, his last poll was about 1 week ago, and 25% are undecided, right? So this is going to go down to the wire. So I, like you, have no idea who's going to win. But I'd like you to think about some of the issues that I'm going to explain to you. It's like a theory of how to think about a lot of the issues that this country is facing, especially on the economic side. So I'd like to refer to this book by the chief economist of the UK Development Agency, who is now a professor at Oxford. He was brought down to Sri Lanka 2 years ago, called Stefan Durkheim. He's actually of Belgian origin, but based in the UK. So he wrote this book called Gambling on Development. And the thesis of his book is that in any society, there is an elite, right? And this elite is not necessarily a well-established order. It could be quite loose. These are the people who have the power. And there is something called the elite bargain, in which these people decide how the power is going to be distributed. Now, an elite in a society can either decide to extract out of the system, so to enrich themselves, or they can do what is called the development bargain, which means that they get together and say that we are going to develop this country. And what Stefan Durkheim does in his book is he explains countries in which the elite have decided to extract out of the country, and a few examples of countries where the elite decided to develop the country, right? So he categorizes three things this elite bargain has to have. That it is a real and credible plan that they have to put forward. They have to have an understanding of the capability of their state, right? It's one thing to say that you believe in state-led, but that has to be mirrored by the capability of what your state can do. And there are things that the state should do, and there are things that the state should not do. And there is also the political and technical ability of your government. So in an era like we are facing in Sri Lanka, we have a very weak state. So I have volunteered a lot of time in various kind of committees, etc. of government, and I can tell you that 40 years or 50 years, ever since we changed the constitution in 1971, where we moved away from the Ceylon Civil Service, which became the Sri Lanka Civil Service, the Sri Lanka Administrative Service, the state capacity has weakened significantly. So we have a very large state, but the capacity is weak. And even the talented people that are in the system are unable to operate because the politicians dominate. Now, there were two crucial decisions that were made. That prior to 1971 constitution, there was something called the Civil Service Commission, right? It is a civil service commission that appointed, in the old British system, permanent secretaries. So permanent means that they would be there for 5 years, right? So we changed in the 71 constitution where cabinet will appoint the secretaries. And the 1978 constitution, it is the president who appoints the secretaries, right? So when the president can appoint and president can remove. The second thing is again 50.1 and 50.2 of the constitution says that the secretaries will work under the direction and control of the minister. Right? So this concept of an independent civil service, we don't have here. So this is where the quality has deteriorated and the politicization of the system has happened. Just to do a quick check, how many people in this audience have read the Constitution of Sri Lanka? They are lawyers, right? People who put their hands up, because that's a mandatory subject. So I saw about 4 or 5, right? I don't know how many people here, but 100. You have read part of it, right? People in Sri Lanka get also very excited about human rights. How many people have read the UN Declaration of Human Rights? 1, 2, right? But passions are very high, okay? This document came in the 1950s. We are signatory from long time ago. And if you read it, you'll say, why are we making such a big deal about this? This is for our own protection. So as you can see, that there is a huge gap of understanding in our country, and that is what people like Advocata are trying to address to minimize that knowledge gap. Because I think that if you want a vibrant country, you need to have knowledgeable citizens. Okay? So unfortunately, because we don't have a proper system of civic education, etc. in our country, lots of people have opinions, but they are not informed opinions. So 2 issues have dominated this election. One on corruption, and the second is on the economy. So let me first give you a framework how to think about corruption, right? So I called it a primer on corruption. Now, what is the definition of corruption? Okay, it is the abuse of public office for personal gain. Okay. So we don't score very high on corruption perception according to Transparency International. You can see a relatively clean system like Singapore scores very high, and we are almost 50% lower than their score. Okay, and this is of course a perception, but perceptions matter. So what is the impact of corruption, right? The first thing is it reduces economic growth, all right? And as I've listed there, it leads to misallocation of resources. So it leads to corruption and inefficiency of public funds. Lower FDI, because no foreign investor wants to come to a country where there's a lot of corruption. Reduce entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship is a lot of risk taking. And if they feel that the field is not fair, then why bother? Increased inequality and poverty. So misuse of public funds, skewed access to opportunities. The system is always gained. We are even corrupting people on entry to schools. Regressive taxes and services. Because you can't collect the taxes basically, and you turn to indirect taxation, which hurts the poor more than the rich. Because the poor have less savings, the rich people have more savings, they consume less. Higher cost for business, increased cost of doing business, unfair competition, uncertainty and unpredictability. Weaken public institutions. Erosion of trust, regulatory failures, undermines rule of law, judicial corruption, distorted policy making. Corruption therefore acts as a tax on economic development, dragging down growth, increasing inequality and hampering overall prosperity. So there are two types of corruption. One called bureaucratic corruption. Okay? So that is the administration system, petty corruption. And speed money is also part of that. Right? So I used to ask the question, is there a difference between paying somebody for doing something they should be doing and paying somebody for doing something they should not be doing? Right? But both basically, now we have a new anti-corruption law. Both are equal evils. Then you have political corruption. Involves the misuse of political power by elected officials or high-level government authorities to maintain power, influence decision-making and enrich themselves. And I've given certain examples. It weakens democracy, unfair distribution of resources, economic distortions. So since corruption is such a topical subject, you need to understand a little bit of a framework of what are we talking about. So I will give you a high-profile case of how it cost us. Now, I have been a volunteer of the state-owned enterprise unit, restructuring unit. So one of the companies that we tackled was Sri Lankan Airlines. No bioking. Right? Now, in 2012, there was an individual who was appointed as a CEO. This individual may have been so good that he was also appointed the CEO of Mobitel at the same time. Sri Lankan Airlines, running an airline, is an extremely difficult business. Okay. Now, this was a time at the zenith of Mahinda Rajapaksa's reign. And tourism was the real sunrise industry. And everybody was saying that Sri Lanka was the place to visit. So obviously, your national airline, which was then taken away from Emirates, needed to expand its planes. So there was a negotiation with Airbus to expand the fleet. Right? No proper analysis was made about exactly how big the expansion was going to be. But depending on the inducement, they placed a very large order. Now, an intermediary of Airbus was negotiating with this individual. So this individual said that we would like to order 6 Airbus A330 aircrafts. For every aircraft, I want $1 million. So 6 A330s that were delivered, the inducement offered by a large European company, some kind of intermediary, $6 million. Okay. These aircrafts were delivered. So we paid $200,000 more per month to lease each aircraft. So instead of paying $800,000, we paid $1 million. So $200,000 into 6 is $1.2 million a month into 12. $14.4 million. And I took the period pre-COVID. So for those 5 years, we paid an additional $75 million. Okay. Then we said we will lease 4 A350 aircrafts, which is a bigger aircraft than our A330s that we have. And he said for each lease aircraft, I want an inducement of $300,000. So 4 of those aircrafts, $1.2 million. Okay. These aircrafts were ready for delivery in 2015. There was a Yahaparna government. There was no unity on the board. By the time they decided to cancel the order, they had to pay a cancellation fee of $115 million. Then they ordered another 4 A350 aircrafts, which was going to be financed on the balance sheet of Sri Lankan Airlines. He asked for $1.16 million each. We had paid an advance of $19 million. And by the time it was cancelled, they confiscated the $19 million. Right? So the total inducement that he requested he requested for $16.5 million. It ended up costing us $200 million. A UK agency that was going to provide export credit started querying who these inducement payments were being made to. It was a company in Brunei. They investigated and they found one female director. And they asked the CEO, "Is this your wife?" And he said, "No, she has the same name as my wife." Out of the $16.5 million, only $2 million was paid. Only $2 million was paid. Because after investigation, they said something is not right here. We are stopping this. A UK court in 2020, due to some other petition, inquired into this matter. So there was a Taiwanese airline, there was a Malaysian, this Air Asia, and us. And I have given the details of this court case. I didn't make this all up. It's all on the internet. You can just Google it and read the whole. So they got 2 million, they costed 200 million. So you destabilized, you put the wrong people on the boards in a difficult business, in a very difficult business, right? Now this is a graphic example of corruption. When this court case came out, they arrested the wife. After maybe 3-4 days, it was on a bail. Nothing has happened. Okay. So I can understand why this is such a topical issue, and I'm showing you a graphic example of how costly it has been. There have been so many blunders, right? In public procurement, the most cost-effective solution is never selected. It is the one which has the highest inducement. So, all credit to the current administration. They asked IMF to do something called a governance diagnostic assessment. How many people read the report? Nobody. Part of it. I've been pushing to have it translated into Sinhala and Tamil. I'm told partly it is. So my think tank, it's not my think tank, but what I lead, did a governance conference where we want to action this. You can do Advocata Institute, and in a YouTube channel, there is a playlist. All the findings of this assessment are discussed in detail in 6 sessions. I urge you to watch it. And there is a shorter version if you don't have the patience to watch for 6-7 hours. There are like 3-minute clips, 4-minute clips. It is a must for any citizen. So the recommendations are broken down into the following. Legal changes, proceeds of crime legislation, National Audit Act, Revised Companies Act, Public Procurement Law. We only have public procurement guidelines. If we had a public procurement law, no way will a 500 megawatt wind power project be even attempted to give to somebody at 8.3 US cents when the same individual is doing it in India for 3.3. And Manna has better winds than Gujarat. Restrict ministerial authority on tax changes, the so-called commodity levy and the overnight gazette. Institutional changes, CIABOC, that is the corruption fighting entity. And I urge you that if you watch the video and even the shorter playlist, the head of CIABOC at that time during the Yapanda government, Sarat Jayamana, I asked the question about the chief of staff of the former president, how they caught him. They caught him at the Taj car park. You should listen to that story. And what he says is that it was an Indian businessman who came forward and complained. And he urged people to come forward. Right. So I go back to the message I said that you need active citizens if you want to change this place. It is not only politicians who change it. It is a responsibility of all of us. Enhance coordination and information sharing and the anti-money laundering and terrorism financing. And policy changes. SOE reform, where I have been involved in transparency in procurement, National Asset Registry, Recovery Registry, money laundering, judicial and legal framework. In the Annexure 2, now these things, there are over 90 recommendations in that report. 16 are priority recommendations. But in Annexure 2, they have about 5 pages about the need for an independent public prosecutor. Because the prosecutor in our system is with the Attorney General's Department. And what they argue is that it is conflicted. But it requires a lot of technical effort, so they don't put it as a priority recommendation. But since I had to analyze the manifestos of 4 candidates, the JVP one was like a machine translation of the Sinhala one, because that was what was available prior to 2nd September. I believe both SJB and the NPP manifesto talks about setting up an independent public prosecutor. So many of us should hold them to that promise, right? And in that governance conference that we did, there is one session, the last session, where our own Radhika Kumaraswamy has a conversation with the UK's ex-Director of Public Prosecution, Sir Max Hill. It is a video worth listening to. The next problem is the economy. It's the problem of debt. Many of you will not understand this algebra. Some of you may. So what this algebra is doing is it is breaking down into components what drives a ratio called debt to GDP. Right? There are many criterias. One of it is how big is your debt relative to the output of your economy. So it's a measure of debt carrying capacity. When an assessment was done of Sri Lanka's debt, because our former economic czar had a penchant for hiding stuff, right? He put it in this pocket, that pocket. He was very good at that. So first they had to do an audit. How much did Sri Lanka owe? And the public debt includes the state-owned enterprises, in which the central government has given guarantees, and the central bank debt. When they accounted for all the debt, it came to 128% of GDP. Now you might ask, like, what should it be? So there is no red line. But generally for a developing country, which is called market access, which borrows from the markets, it should be about 60%. You can't argue and say that Japan has 200% and the United States has 120%. There they have large savings pools. Right? They have very low inflation. Japan had negative deflation, negative inflation. Right? They have an aging population, a lot of savings. We don't. And we went to the markets and borrowed a lot of debt. Right? So we were not even danger zone. We had fallen past the abyss. So what this does is it breaks these debt drivers into some components. And let me spend a moment explaining it, because I would like you to leave this place understanding a little bit of this. So the first concept is something called the primary balance, which means it's your government's revenue minus expenditure without interest. So the best way to think about this is if you default on your debt, You don't have to service it. Are you having enough revenue to pay for all your expenses? You don't have to worry about interest because you're defaulted on it. So if you can have a primary balance surplus, you don't have to worry about your past debt. So how you should evaluate a finance minister is whether he or her was able to get it within a primary balance surplus. That means the revenue that they got was enough to pay for the capital expenditure and the recurrent expenditure without interest. Since independence, only 5 times did we post the primary balance surplus. Couple of times in the 1950s, once in 1991 and 2017 and 18, and that also very, very small ones. So if you post primary balance surplus, and our target this year is 1% surplus, last year it was 0.6% of GDP, and next year I believe it's 2.3%, and we have to hold it at that, right? So what's called the fiscal effort has to be very high, and it has to come on the back of more revenues. Sri Lanka does not have a spending problem. Contrary to what people think, our expenditure on what is called primary expenditure is low. Our expenditure currently on capital expenditure is a mere 2% of GDP. We should be at least spending 4%. So we have cut our capex. Right. The problem with Sri Lanka is the interest is very high. It is about 8.5% of GDP last year. This is one of the highest in the world. So the first thing is the primary balance. And what happens is that if the target is 2.3% of GDP and you run a primary balance of 2.3% for 10 years, you will generate roughly 23% of GDP from the primary balance to reduce that debt. The second is the numerator, which is the debt. What is the interest rate on the numerator? The denominator is your GDP. So what you want to do is what we call the real interest rate and the real growth rate, which is adjusted for inflation, that you want the growth rate to be higher than the real interest rate, so that the denominator, the bottom part, is growing faster than the numerator. Our problem now is it's the other way around. So we call this the snowball effect. So the debt is snowballing. It is said that Einstein said that compound interest is man's greatest discovery. That's when you are saving. But when you are borrowing, you are getting buried. So economists call it the R minus G. R is the real interest rate minus G. Right? R must be lower than G. It should be a negative number. In our case, it's a positive number. So even if you generate a primary balance surplus, you have to get that R minus G to be negative territory. Otherwise, whatever you are generating from the fiscal side will get offset. The third driver is the exchange rate effect. Because 50% or slightly less than that of your debt is issued in foreign exchange. So if the currency depreciates, the value of that in Sri Lankan rupees increases. But you don't get an offsetting figure from your GDP because your exports, which is one part of your economy, is a much smaller component, only 15%. And then there is a balancing factor. Now, the next one shows you what's been driving our debt. And for many years, it is the interest that was driving it. Okay, the biggest contributor to the growth in the debt is the interest of the debt. Now your problem is that even after debt restructuring, your debt is still at 110% of GDP. And the interest rate is high. Now 75% of your interest is domestic debt. Only 25% is on foreign debt because it's at a much lower rate. Right? So when all these mavericks say that they will redo the DSA, and I have written that there's a problem of semantics, that DSA's debt sustainability analysis is a methodology. It's actually implemented as an Excel spreadsheet. You can't renegotiate an Excel spreadsheet. What they are saying is that they want to renegotiate the debt. And I have pointed it out that if you are going to renegotiate the debt, it is good, but you better start first with the domestic debt. And if you go and renegotiate the domestic debt, which you should have done earlier, which you did a very light debt restructuring, you are not going to have many friends. And I don't think anybody in this room who is going to see maybe 15, 20, 25% haircut on your rupee savings is going to be very happy. Right? So the IMF does a fan chart because the debt sustainability analysis is a probabilistic model. Because, so many buts and ifs are there. And you are forecasting into the future where there is no certainty. So if we are in such a precarious situation that if we have any shocks, we don't have buffers. Weather is one of the biggest shocks. For those of you who believe in God, he or she is a Sri Lankan. Because the weather gods have been very kind to us. We had 3 back-to-back droughts in 2016 and the first half of 2017. That derailed Yahapalana. Last year was a El Nino year. But because of an event called the Indian Ocean Dipole, where the western part of the Indian Ocean heats up, in the months of September, October, November, we had record amount of rain, unexpected amount of rain instead of a drought. And if your northeast monsoon fails, your Mahakrop gets affected. So we started the year with a record amount of hydro generation capacity and a record amount of water in our irrigation tanks. This is why we had a very good harvest come March, April. And all the consumer durable companies, etc., had very good sales, which you can see in the results on 30th June. So, on the eve of our debt restructuring, we had 9 trillion of bonds. These are longer dated securities. 1.9 trillion basically of these bonds were issued during the crisis period, starting from 2022 to mid-2023 or first quarter 2023. They were issued at very, very high interest rates, 27% on average. Some of them were 2 years, 4 years, some went up to 10 years. So people who bought these instruments never expected to be paid these high interest rates. They were always expecting some kind of haircut to happen. So what the government did is they restructured the treasury bills held by the central bank, which was total outstanding treasury bills was 5 trillion. Half of that was held by the central bank and it was spread over 15 years. So then you reduce the interest rate and you also spread it out over a long period of time. Out of the 9 trillion of the bonds, 1.9 trillion was these high yielding bonds, 22%. So they restructured what was owned by the superannuation funds because it was easy pickings. You didn't have to go and look for individuals. The problem is the superannuation funds didn't hold 43% of these high yielding bonds. They only held something like 21%. So although there was a hue and cry about the EPF, which was a gross injustice, the NPV loss was only 3%. Because they were replaced by bonds yielding about 10%, and they also had very low yielding bonds issued long time ago at 6, 7, 8%, so it offset. So those high yielding bonds that they had to give up to get bonds at 10%, they took a loss. But the majority of these bonds were held outside. Because we didn't do it, instead of paying 10% interest rate, we are paying 27% interest rate on about 1.45 trillion of bonds. This year alone, I'm estimating it is costing us 250 billion rupees. Now, majority of these bonds are held through the banks, they're held through insurance funds, etc. If you keep out the state banks, and you look at the private sector banks, and you look at the insurance companies and the primary dealers and individuals who also had significant holdings in these things, I called it the greatest wealth transfer to 200 families. Okay. Now these things are not understood. These things are not understood. So what has happened is in this crisis, there have been huge wealth generated for some people. So this burden sharing, which should be that, the people, because 1% of the households own 40% of the wealth. Now, the way I'm explaining it, vast number of people who are having a huge resentment and anger, they don't understand all this. They just see that their life has just become rotten. But if you want to understand where this anger is coming, the causes of this are because of many poor decision making over the years. Right? Now, our problem is that it will take us till 2026 to get our economy back to where it was in 2017. Because the recovery is very slow. And there's an interesting thing. Now, RW claimed that he did 100 laws. This one he fiddled a bit because I was an intervening petitioner. But from all the laws that have been passed, you as a citizen have a huge responsibility to make sure that they never change this law. This is the central bank law. Clause 6 says, the primary object of the central bank shall be to achieve and maintain domestic price stability. The other objective is financial stability. So no longer is the objective of the central bank basically to worry about economic growth. Their only mandate, their primary mandate is to make sure that inflation is kept within the target. The set target, which is between the finance minister and the monetary board, is 5%. They have a lower bound and upper bound, plus or minus 2%. So they have to keep it between 3 and 7. Now the problem is, inflation is below the lower bound. So if for 2 successive quarters they are below the lower bound, they have to go to parliament and explain why is it. So it is not only too high inflation, but too low inflation also is bad. And it is likely that next month inflation will come down even more because oil prices have crashed. And I'm expecting another reduction. Okay, so now we have a problem of too low inflation. And for that R minus G, when inflation goes down and nominal interest rates recently have been going, the R is now going at 7, 8, 9. In the IMF debt sustainability analysis, the R is set at 1 and 2. So this 7 and 8 is for domestic interest rates. Tomorrow there is a very large bond auction, 290 billion. It's expected some bonds to go at 14%. That's a disaster. When you consider that inflation is going at 1%, how can we be borrowing at 14%? The next thing in the law is no more monetary financing of the government. So one reason for the interest rates to jump even today, the treasury bill rates all went up, no longer can the central bank fund. And they are still sitting on 2.5 trillion of domestic securities that will unwind over 15 years, starting from 2028. And that is why I wrote a small op-ed in the Daily Mirror, what I call the winner's curse, that a presidential term is 5 years. The next election is August 2029. Out of the 2.5 trillion, starting in 2028, 250 billion of central bank ownership starts maturing. You have to finance it from the market, right? Which means that it will have to come out of households or foreigners. Plus, if we finished external debt restructuring, we have to start settling principals. It all steps up. The recovery is tepid. The biggest impacted sector has been construction, and all construction related sectors that contracted 75%, but it is coming back. The weather helped. This is the best proxy I can give about our energy generation mix. Look at 2016 and 2017. The dark blue line is basically the dark blue line is hydro. Right? It was not the bond scam that derailed Yahapalna. It was the weather. It was the bond scam created political noise, but people were hurting because of the drought. Now, I'll skip that. What the message there is that the IMF has also pointed out that our net external liabilities are very high. 60% of GDP, both borrowing from the government. They said you have to get it down to 30%. Which means that instead of running these very, very high current account deficits, a current account deficit means that we are borrowing from overseas to fund that deficit. Has to become 1% positive. We have been always running at 2%, 3% deficits. Which means that all the policies now is no more stimulation from monetary side, no more stimulation from government side. This is where in my op-ed I said, you are making fiscally profligate promises. Don't honor your promises. Because in the absence of a central bank who can fund it, where is the money? Now the IMF has said that the fiscal consolidation that you need in Sri Lanka is not through spending cuts, but more revenue. And that is a very topical subject about taxation. But remember that we are still at 13% of GDP, tax to GDP. India is 20. Most other countries are 20. In Scandinavia, they're at 50. So our taxation, in spite of the fact that some people have to pay 36% and there's VAT and a lot of political chatter, is still very low. Because they're still not collecting enough. Right? So I don't think there is a necessity to do policy changes, but there has to be a greater effort to go and collect the taxes because not everybody is paying. Now there are all these murmurs about fiddling with the VAT rate and giving different things. It's a completely bad news. Because one thing people don't understand is if you start exempting items from VAT, saying that that's for affordability, or worse, what the NPP are saying is they're going to have multiple rates, which is a disaster basically, is in an economy, what matters is what are called relative prices. So it's not only price in isolation, but the price relative to others. Let me give you an example of proteins, the market for proteins. Now, after they widen the VAT base, most proteins have VAT, except for fish. So now you're distorting demand towards fish. And they also have very little taxation on kerosene, saying that we have to support fishermen's boat. But the least productive boat, you are subsidizing. The day crafts, multi-day trawlers that run on diesel, there is much higher taxation. Right? So you are advantaging fishermen over poultry farmers and dairy farmers. So all over the place, you have distortions, and I have spoken against that, although it is to my personal, against my own personal benefit, like exports. So if you say that I want to give an incentive to exports, I give the example of tea. Only the last fellow in the value chain is getting the benefit. But the value chain for tea in Sri Lanka has about 15 intermediaries. The grower doesn't get it, the tea factory doesn't get it, the lorry transport fellow doesn't get it, the store doesn't get it. So it is really bad policy to have different tax rates for different people. You should just have one rate. Sri Lanka's road to ruination is paved with good intentions, but with disastrous consequences. Because in economics, what matters is not intentions, but consequences. And very quickly, you know the narrative that India helped us? A deeply diabetic patient does not need more sugar. You are doing more damage by a sugar high. Our reserves were coming down. We continued to service these international sovereign bonds. It was match over from 2020. But till we defaulted in 2022 April, we continued to service these instruments because some of their buddies were going and buying this in the secondary market. India gave us $500 million to buy fuel. At the same time, we are settling a $500 million bond. India gives us money. We sold petrol and diesel 40% cheaper than India. And India is a poorer country than Sri Lanka on a per capita basis. And this is a bit of a complicated chart. Shows that, until the adjustment happened, our current account deficit was at record levels. Because we were partying. No change in prices. The first quarter of 2022, which was a crisis, we had 11 hours of power cuts, were record volumes for most companies. They had record sales. That is why they double ordered the inventory, which aggravated the currency crisis even more. All the people were having massive stocks and they were ordering massive stocks. This is a very complicated chart. What I was trying to show, dollars are all fungible. That what India gave us, we took the money basically, and they said that they came to our help. But I'm arguing that dollars are dollars. On a net basis, it was going to service basically continuing the party. So what I'm advocating is if people don't help us, that is the best gift they can give us. Right? Because it has been shown on fuel, 70% of fuel consumption is by top 30% of households. So when you go and reduce taxes on fuel, we never sold fuel below price. The taxation was reduced. You are benefiting people like me. What's the point? So what do? My thing has got cut off there. You have to grow by productivity. Right? No longer can we have other stimulations. And the key thing to grow by productivity is competition. Now the problem with that is, I would say 100% of the people in this audience are for reform, but not my patch. You go reform everybody else's patch, but please leave my patch alone. That's not going to work. So the issue with reform is you got to do all the reform one shot. Because the thing is, everything is interconnected. Right? So if you're going to do labor, land, trade, all of that has to be done all at once. Because then only, everybody can adjust. And trust me, it won't be as bad as people fear, provided it is all done equally. Now the question is that we need to grow. Remember I told you about the R minus G. G has to be higher than R. Now R has a legacy issue, that there's a lot of debt at high interest rates. We have to grow G. Now your problem is, when R is high and you are being rewarded with very high real interest rates, you are being paid not to consume. Because tomorrow's rupee plus the interest rate has much higher purchasing power than today, when your real interest rates are high. The second is investment also will get stalled because your real rates of interest are very high. To get a return higher than that, when you know that demand is going to be weak, is going to be very difficult. That is why you need debt restructuring. That is why it was necessary. And what the debt sustainability analysis tries to do is tries to put these variables in and assess. So now our only hope is to significantly increase productivity, more with less. Another headwind, our population is aging. Unlike India, we don't have a demographic dividend. I don't know how many people are aware that last year our population contracted. The birth rate that used to be about 17 births per 1,000 10 years ago has plummeted to 11 to 12. And it's very clear after COVID, the birth rate has collapsed. People are not having children. We used to have 6 deaths per 1,000. It went up to 8. 40,000 people more are dying. And the fact that you have net migration out, last year was one of the first years where the population contracted. You don't have enough women in the labor force. So out of the economically active population, only 50% are participating in the labor force. The male participation is 70, the female is 35. The gold standard is Vietnam. 80% of the women are participating. The Chinese is about 70. We need to get 35 at least to 50. The resources, this is in the constitution, and you'll be amazed that section 27, directed principles of state policy, it says, and I will read this 27.2.1, these are more aspirational. The establishment of a just and social order in which the means of production, distribution and exchange are not concentrated and centralized in the state agencies or in the hands of a privileged few, but are dispersed among and owned by all the people of Sri Lanka. This is what our constitution says. But I don't think a country is run like this. It's bad for the government to be in business. They have to be a regulator and a policy maker. They cannot be an operator. So I've given roughly the example of the Sri Lanka Ports Authority, where the ministry basically is in charge of the SLPA, but they're also the regulator. They are also the policy maker. They are also the landlord. They are also operating a terminal company. They also have 15% shareholding on the two competitors, and they sit on the boards. In any other country, you will be accused of collusion. So it's a lot of muddled thinking. The state is a very bad owner. And this is an important thing. Those people who say that, oh, you can't sell state assets. The state is a 30% owner in every business, or they have economic interests through the tax system. So if you sell these companies, not only will you get funds up front, whose opportunity costs are probably 10 times more than the dividend they're receiving. Plus, if the new owner runs these businesses well, the government will get 30%. So, my last point here is about the need for exports. This shows you Korea's export mix. This is Vietnam. Look at the growth. Look at the growth. $300 billion worth of exports. And one of their largest export component is mobile phones, because Samsung has huge production capabilities in Vietnam. They have been now big knowledge spillovers. They have come up with their own phone. They have got into electric cars. Look at Sri Lanka. Right. Look at how much we import. Now, we finance these imports because there are a lot of remittances coming here, tourism that is not captured in the trade account. But fundamentally, this shows you the contribution to GDP from exports. Look at Sri Lanka, hardly anything. So very little of the growth that we experience in the post-civil conflict era came from exports. But look at a country like Vietnam, as much as 15% of their growth is coming on the back of growing exports. Sri Lanka has not been that. So this is not showing very well here for the product space. And the problem here is that we haven't been able to diversify our export base. We are doing the same things. So in the interest of time, this is the Scrabble theory of economic development explained by a Harvard professor called Ricardo Hausmann. Very briefly, I will try to explain. He says, think about it like a Scrabble board. Some countries can make simple products. Some countries can make complex products. The countries that can make complex products is analogous to complex words. The very long and difficult words in the Scrabble board has a few critical letters. It is analogous to capabilities. So there are many countries in the world that can make simple products. In Scrabble analogy, simple words. Few countries in the world can make complex products. They have many letters Plus they have some difficult letters, rare letters. So if you make complex products, they're less commoditized. You can command higher prices. That's how your people enjoy high incomes. So what your country needs to do is they need to get into producing more different words. You have to acquire more letters. These letters basically come in the form of tacit knowledge. This is not codified. You can't go and buy it. You can't go and buy machines. And the best way to explain tacit knowledge is think about cooking. I don't think you can learn a lot of dishes by reading a cookbook. It is by imitation and repetition that you'll get the hang of it. So you got to look at somebody who knows it and practice. Sometimes you can't write certain things. It's just you have to get the hang of it. So what they say is that there are two channels to get those tacit knowledge. One is you got to get it through foreigners. The second is through your diaspora who has worked in those countries and have acquired that tacit knowledge. So there are a lot of Sri Lankans who went to Italy who are making pizzas. Okay, so you got to have policies to encourage foreign investment into your country, not mistakenly saying that that is a way to fund your current account deficit. That's a complete misunderstanding. Because your current account deficit is not coming because you need FDI, it's coming because you are over-consuming, over-investment. And that is where when you have tight monetary and fiscal policies, you are going to start running current account surpluses. So those business people here who are still worrying about the Sri Lankan rupee going to 400 is not going to happen. It's not going to happen like previously. Because you don't have a money printing central bank. Your demand is going to be kept in check, both for consumption and investment. So you need foreign investment here because they will bring tacit knowledge, the right kind of tacit knowledge. Right? Or you have to get it on your diaspora. Now the Harvard people also did a research, and the research paper, it's under the Harvard Growth Lab. Anybody is interested, you can go and read it. They were here between 2016 and 2018, care of the Soros Foundation. What they say is that in countries where your diaspora has left your country for economic reasons, tend to engage back more with their mother country. Countries in which the diaspora have left for political reasons don't engage. And they famously analyzed the case of Morocco versus Algeria. Algeria had a big war in the 1960s with the French. There was a huge Algerian diaspora that left. France has like 8% of the population Muslim. There's a significant North African component in there. But the Moroccans in France re-engage with Morocco much more than the Algerians in France. So this begs the question from a Sri Lankan context that why all this reconciliation, etc. is so important. That there is a huge economic dimension to this. Because it is not only money that you need, it is this tacit knowledge. And what they recommended to us was build industrial zones. So if you read the economic transformation law, there is one part called Zone Sri Lanka. So it is progressive policy to build many more industrial zones because our existing industrial zones run at 90% capacity. So what they told us is build tourism zones, Kalpiti, Kuchaveli, build industrial zones where people are there. Because you get a lot of pre-approvals. That is why even the IFC basically when they set up these renewable energy zones in Punyarin and in Siamalandu, etc., you have got most of the approvals beforehand. So you don't waste time trying to get approvals. And I have gone to the Dominican Republic also to see private sector industrial zones. Even the buildings are built, by the owner. So they have all these medical devices where the big American companies have set up operations because they're only 1.5 hours away from Florida, basically. Very quickly they can go. And this is the success of in Vietnam, in Thailand, in Cambodia, of course in China they had special economic zones, because you sanitize it. And when foreigners come, basically, the risk you significantly reduce. Now the problem is that unless you get into public-private partnerships with government, our bigger zones like Katunayak and BOI are 300 acres. Most other countries, the zones are like 500 acres, 1,000 acres. And you need to bring all the infrastructure to the zone. So if you ask, like, how do we catalyze more export economy, build zones, you need free trade agreements. Because then if you do stuff in Sri Lanka, you can export to many countries with less friction. In the absence of free agreements, it's very difficult to get companies. Because typically in any company, you will only add 30% value addition. So 70% has to be bought in from somewhere else. And that is what it means about getting into these value chains, global value chains. Because you can't seldom make the whole product. You will make one small part of a complex product. Okay. So in this talk today that I gave you, I just tried to explain how I'm thinking about the challenges of Sri Lanka. And I hope that in this period of time, I have given you quite literally food for thought. So I think you're pretty hungry and you want me to stop, or maybe it's a happy hour. So on that note, I will stop. I will be hanging around here, or I can take any questions if there are. What do you want me to do? Questions? But I will hang around here if you want to talk to me afterwards. So, any questions?
Yeah, it appears like from what you said that the numbers are so disastrous that we can never come out of this.
You should be worried.
Very well.
This is where I have said this publicly. We can't experiment.
We cannot. Yeah.
You can't say, let's give them there is no business of chance. You're going to have a clear policy and you can't muck around. Like, for example, saying that we are going to redo the DSA and we're going to delay. Because if you delay the debt, what happens is the interest, the high interest on the existing foreign debt is accruing. That's accruing at like 6.5%, 7%. The new interest is at 3%.
And that's snowball effect.
So that, you see, since we stopped the debt service payments in April 2022, the delayed interest is another $2 million.
So that won't be waived off.
So it's accumulating, and whatever. So if you delay by 6 months, for example, another $500 million you have added to it. And I'm not sure about interest on interest, but they will start demanding interest on the $2 billion also. So what I'm saying is that we are not out of the woods. That we have to be very focused, and as I said, that there has to be, and what I am trying to do is to bring, Jamaica came out after defaulting 2 times. It's called the Jamaican exception. It's an amazing story. It's like a mirror of Sri Lanka, but they defaulted 2 times, right?
Were the numbers the same as Sri Lanka?
Not as bad, but they run a 6% primary balance surplus. But they changed the central bank law. But there was a huge civil society movement that came together and said no more. I don't see that happening in Sri Lanka. So that has to happen, because you can't just leave it to the politicians.
So can I assume that after hearing what you said, that we are actually having an election at the wrong time?
no, you have to have this election because the mandate of the people should be exercised.
I mean, no,
Yes.
ignoring that part.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a mandate that has to be exercised. Sadly, it's only happening at the wrong time.
It is happening, I think, at the right time, but you are having a population who doesn't understand. So we have tried little bit to influence the youth. My colleague Dhananath, who is very good in speaking in the vernacular, and some others, we are trying, but we have a long way to go. And there are competing views, etc. But it's about getting the narrative right, because don't forget that we don't teach economics in school, right? So people don't understand.
Thank you, Mr. Jafferjee. I really enjoyed listening to your speech today. In fact, I follow a lot of your talks, etc., a lot of the time. I'm actually also an economist at Advocata, and I mean, I've been following what you said and looking at the sort of how things are proceeding in the government as sector, and often despairing because some of the things you mentioned, like industrial zones, or real interest rates, or corruption, or just basic policies should be obvious to the government. But what I feel is the reason they haven't been following these policies is because the government has different objectives, or the ministers have different objectives. And unfortunately, they don't seem to care enough about the country. They have their own personal objectives a lot of the time. So given that's the case and that's happened, and I think in a sense, because of the IMF, we've had to change our policies. We've been forced to change our policies and look at it in a fresh way. But my concern is what is going to ensure that a future government follows some of the things we're saying and not just go their own way and do things because of corruption or other reasons like that. So how are we going to ensure the next government follows a lot of your policies or your own thinking?
So one side comment I can give you is that go and watch a brilliant talk given last week by Lee Buchheit, who is the godfather of debt restructuring, about sovereign debt and what you call the intergenerational transfer. So what has happened in Sri Lanka is we have borrowed from not the next generation, the generation after, and had a great party, right? And an enormous amount of wealth has been created amongst a few people. So I'm afraid that the pessimist in me says we'll need a second default. And that will start hurting. What we'll need to change is that whoever is going to come to power, they have to realize in the next 3 months after they get into power, that look, it's a ticking bomb here. Basically, we better act. And that first 100 days are going to matter. So they have to do the labor reform, they have to have pro-trade, they have to handle our foreign relations well because we have to trade with the rest. And that God, who I think is a Sri Lankan, that one has to be on our side. Because if we get any major shocks, we don't have any vulnerabilities. We don't have buffers. And the simple thing is that this is the most cliched term, but it's time for what Kennedy said. It's about what we are going to do for our country.
Mr. Jafferjee, thank you for that presentation. Like doing a PhD in a box, actually. Real knowledge. Thank you for that. So, whilst you painted this whole picture of doom and gloom, I mean, there must be some magical solution that we have to come up with to get out of this situation. Otherwise, for years on years, the current president is on record saying that 2048 is the year that we'll get out of all these things and so on. So, if you're looking at a single, I mean, I know the interest rates with the aging population, so your R minus G formula, you need to get the G up to, a very high number, and you put a chart out there to increase the productivity and so on. But the real magic wand, the magic spell out there is these industrial zones getting foreign direct investment into the country with huge brand names, marquee companies into the country that will bring the stuff that you said, the tacit knowledge, the investments, the productivity will obviously go high because you're running international standards. So don't you think that if you're looking at a one-shot solution, keeping all the other challenges aside, what you put this slide is the real mantra?
So that won't solve all our problems. That is a good idea, but you have to get rid of basics. So before this meeting, I was asked to come for a meeting with a representative from the German government. And he was telling me, now he's Germany's representative to the Paris Club, basically. And he says, look, you're still in what is called selective default. So I give you the example of a Sri Lankan company that makes ships. And they have made a niche in basically cable laying ships, Colombo dockyards. But they have a very distressed balance sheet because they've had losses. But any construction contract, the contractor has to give a guarantee, right? You have to give a guarantee. And the buyers are from abroad. They won't accept the guarantee from a Sri Lankan bank. So they have to look for a foreign bank. If you do like a confirmed LC, the guarantee costs are phenomenal. Then it eats into your profit. So another bank CEO called me, foreign bank CEO Sri Lankan. He says, look, I'm having a problem next year. My head office is not willing to increase my credit terms in Sri Lanka because we are still in selective default. So two political parties are saying that they are going to redo the DSA and renegotiate and all these things. One political party saying this thing with an understanding what it is. So the answer, if there is one magic bullet, I only have a word for that. Pragmatism. Our people have to be pragmatic, that they have to leave aside ideology and say that, we are in a bad wicket and you cannot be anchored by certain beliefs or ideology. You have to do whatever it takes to get us going. And I can tell you that if that single-handed focus is there, if there was one criticism, and you don't want this to be a political thing, but I will say this of RW, where I have worked in his committees, is he is not a good communicator to the people. I mean, a lot of the stuff he has done and even tried to do were good stuff, but he can't tell the people. You have to keep on telling. Change management is about, you can never under-communicate. You can never over-communicate, So you need two things, pragmatism and a great leader who will take the people. And the people have to trust them because you're going to go through a very difficult time, right? Change management is more than the pain, it is the fear of the pain. It's like injections, The injection is less painful than it before the injection. So somebody that's real leadership.
Just a quick question. I would like your thoughts on Food City and the future of Food City and the FDI that we're looking.
It's a great place to go and live. And I also went and inquired about it. But I think they were expecting a square foot to sell villas at $1,000, which was about $4 million, I think, for a villa, which I thought was ridiculous. It's a real estate project. It's not going to save Sri Lanka, basically. But it's a service-oriented project. I would think that I would focus in the short term by actually building tourism zones. The plan from 2016 is there for Kochi Valley and Kalpitiya, basically. Both didn't get done. Because the first integrated tourism kind of development is Bentota. Jeffrey Barber was the designer. That is why he designed the railway station. Right? So basically, it is a good idea. And the other last comment I want to say is that, we have to open up to the world. We have to open up to the world. So we Sri Lankans have become excessively nationalistic. Advocata is going to do a project to show how foreign influences have impacted us. Where do you think Kaludodol came from?
Goa.
Indonesia. Did you know that Kaludodol came from Indonesia? This was told to me by a person in the Australian High Commissioner. He's married to an Achanese, an Aussie. He said, your Kaludodol came from Indonesia. So many things that we take for granted. So Advocata's project is how foreign influences impacted our language, food, architecture, furniture, clothing, language, so much of influences. Commerce, jurisprudence. So what is this fear of foreigners? On that note, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jafferjee, for that fantastic presentation. And he will be around to answer more questions and mingle with us after the program finishes. So to tell thank you to you, sir, like a small token of appreciation, can I call DGP Delrin to please hand over this token of appreciation? Can we have a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen? Can I now ask IPP Ashik to deliver the vote of thanks?
Thanks, Michael. Good evening, ladies and gents. First of all, before proposing this vote of thanks, I think I should be thankful for being given the opportunity to propose this in this august audience. Actually, it's a pleasure to be part of such a meeting, and let me take this order of giving thanks. First of all, I think we should thank our presidents who came together and unanimously put such a thing together. So here's to the presidents of Port City, Fort, Cinnamon Gardens, Reconnections, PanColombo, Infinity, Central, and my own club, Midtown. Thank you so much for putting this thing together and having us in this kind of venue with everything done to the T. And the team that went ahead and got things done, thank you so very much. Also, it's midweek. It's a very busy time for many people. So thank you so much for making the time and for the questions and putting things in perspective. I don't want to take too much of your time. Like the keynote speaker did mention, there is a lot of food for thought and also food. I kept the best for last. Of course, thanks to the district and the PDGs and all the district officials who are here and the members. But I think last but not ever the least, thank you so much to our keynote speaker, Murtaza Jafferjee, the chair of Advocata Institute. I think everyone will take home one thing for sure, signature no-nonsense style, putting things in place. No room for anyone to actually pinpoint. So thank you so much for the eloquence. Thank you so much for sharing the information and pinpointing things so very well. And I think one thing that I would walk away from here, and most of you will, is a few things that I picked up from what you said, apart from everything else. We need to focus on productivity and being open and there is no other way that we'll develop. And there's one thing that he started off with that really rung well, and that is we need knowledgeable and active citizens. And I just hope and pray that we can become that. So thank you so much. Have a pleasant evening, and let's enjoy the fellowship later on, Michael.
Thank you very much, IBB Ashik. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I declare the meeting adjourned and open for fellowship and dinner. Thank you very much and have a good night. God bless.